Welcome to Understanding China, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation's series dedicated to helping Americans better understand the nature of the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party, and key issues in U.S. China relations. I'm Murray Bissett, Director of Academic Programs, and I'm pleased to present to you today Dr. Carlos Ponce, Senior Fellow and Director for Latin American Programs here at VOC. Carlos is a 28-year veteran working in the fields of governance, civil society development, and human rights and democracy empowerment in the US and Latin America and the Caribbean. You can follow his work on Twitter at CE with an S. During today's event, Latin America's CCP invasion, Carlos will discuss the ongoing efforts by the Chinese Communist Party to gain influence and power in the Western Hemisphere. We are truly privileged to have Carlos here with us today to share his unparalleled knowledge and experience of the threats to freedom in the Americas. Following his presentation, we will have a discussion with Carlos, drawing upon questions submitted by the audience. You can submit questions for him throughout the event using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And with that, Carlos, I welcome you and invite you to share your presentation.
Thank you, Murray. Thank you, Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. This is an extraordinary opportunity, and this effort to expose the CCP and the effort from China to try to derail democracies and also to intervene in different regions is a fundamental effort, and also it's an opportunity to expose the Chinese regime for what it is. For me, it's an opportunity also to talk a little bit about Latin America and something that it's not so easy to understand because we don't see a major Chinese military intervention in the region. It looks like more an economic intervention that benefit the Latin American countries. And we're going to see that is not the reality behind this. The Chinese CCP has been planning this for a long time, and they have a long-term plan. They have been evolving, and they have been successful in their plan. They have been growing in terms of the investment in the region. They have been growing in terms of the commercial expansion, the diplomatic expansion, the strategic alliance. And also they have been taking advantage of the lack of reaction from the U.S. and the short-term planning from the U.S. business sector and the U.S. government. They have been taking advantage also of the bucolic views from some of the left in Latin America that sees the U.S. as an enemy, and they see China as an opportunity also for advance in their own agendas. That was the case with Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, or in the case of Cuba. And precisely, the advance of China in Latin America has been related also with the pink tide. So the change of governments, a change of regimes, or more authoritarian left regimes in Latin America has been allowing China to enter in the region. And now, with a fit into the region, they have been also creating an opportunity for the business to evolve into a more integrated effort with a different business sector in the region. For some cheerleaders, there are numerous cheerleaders in the region that believe that China's role in Latin America is a role that allows for better economy, for more export to a new market and a bigger market, the Chinese market, a new investment in the region, cheaper prices for in terms of import and new investment in infrastructure, better roads, better airports, better ports, and more jobs, 1.8, 2 million new jobs into the economy, and also the investment in telecommunication, the investment in different areas that will improve the economy and will help in development initiative in each one of these countries. And of course, also is breaking the hegemonic structure from the U.S., the view that the U.S. has been intervening in Latin America, and also they have the view that Chinese goods and Chinese investment and Chinese economic activities will surpass the U.S. in the future. So they want to be on the top of the economy. But the reality is different. China is an expanding power, is a new economic colonization in the region. China its investment in the region is more negative than positive in terms of the effects, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. The Chinese investment doesn't establish conditions of transparency, institutional strengthening, human rights, environmental protection, fair labor conditions, corruption, fight against corruption. To the contrary, those are dark investments surrounded by the power of the Chinese regime and the negotiation with corrupt regimes in some of the countries in Latin America, and some weak institutions in several countries. The investment has been more in raw materials and a strategic sector, not a major investment in terms of the industrial process, improving the innovation in the region, improving the other sectors different than raw materials. Infrastructure, yes, we saw that the cheerleaders love the infrastructure, yes, but the infrastructure in Latin America has been focused in developing the infrastructure that the regime needs to move around the region, to use the airports, to use the ports, to get into the areas of Chinese operation more than supporting the country's infrastructure. And also, there are a lot of loans and some credits, but those loans and those credits has been tied to contracts that allow the Chinese regime to take control of the minerals, to take control of the oil, to take control of the land. So it's there are long-term concessions with some bizarre agreements and bizarre conditions behind those contracts and those concessions. And we are not talking about technology, we are not talking about industry, we're just talking about raw materials, we are just talking about controlling the telecommunication, controlling the infrastructure, controlling the ports, controlling what is necessary for China to maintain the hegemonic control in Latin America. Yes, it's a change. So China has been planning this for a long time. China has been creating an opportunity. They have been painting this as a way to promote multilateralization, promote democracy, promote different alternatives from the region. But we know that it's different in terms of the approach. China entered to Latin America supported by Cuba and by Venezuela. That's why we see that the loans to Cuba are so high, because it's payback time for China. China has been expanding in terms of the markets and the exports, import from 1% from the total export to China to 20% grow every year, from 2% to 20%. So China has been growing and has been growing exponentially every year. This is the only year that probably is not going to be grow in terms of the China's investment. But as we can see, all the major countries in the region, Mexico, that's one of the biggest economy, $90 billion. Colombia, $14.6 billion in different activities, larger partners. Brazil, one of the major countries of the region, first with soybeans, now it's meat, and Brazil has been expanding in terms of the investment from China in Brazil, getting into oil, getting into telecommunication, getting into infrastructure, and Brazil is getting more and more dependent in terms of the Chinese interest in the country and the Chinese economy. Argentina growing also now that the Chinese has been allowing the meat from Argentina to enter into China. So Argentina, 64 of the land of Argentina is soybean, and 80% of the soybeans ends in China. So Argentina is dependent on China. Venezuela loaned $67 billion. Whatever happened in Venezuela with the current regime, the next government in Venezuela will be in tremendous step with China. And probably all the agreements and all the contracts and all the concessions to China will make the next government dependent on China. Bolivia also, minerals, Ecuador, Peru, all the countries in the region has been getting in bed with the Chinese regime and has been taking advantage of the loans from China and the opportunities of the Chinese market. But the reality is that China's priority in the region is just commodities. Commodities, infrastructure, oil and gas, mining, electricity, utilities, information, and telecommunication. Those are the priorities of China in Latin America. It's a new colonialism. It's not leaving anything in those countries. It's not improving the situation. It's not improving the infrastructure of any of these countries. Second priority from China, infrastructure. Here we can see all the different infrastructure projects from China, from ports to airports, ports in different countries, ports in Peru, ports in Brazil, ports in the Caribbean, helping some infrastructure also in different countries to allow the Chinese operation in all these countries to be successful, to have more opportunities to control the areas where the Chinese regime operates in the region. But another area that has been growing in Latin America has been telecommunication. One way, and the Chinese regime has been taking control of the communications in several countries in the region. Venezuela right now, one way controls the national telecommunication company, control the mobile industry, controls several operations in telecommunications, same as Cuba, investing in Cuba, same in the Caribbean. And one way has a plan to invest $50 million this year in Latin America to create some special labs to expand the operations, but also expanding the operation in different countries, especially Brazil. They plan to invest $800 million in Brazil to take control of the telecommunications in Brazil. So from no investment at all to controlling 20% of the market in some countries, 25% of the market in other countries, and the full operation in countries like Cuba or Venezuela. Then there's a major infrastructure projects. Of course, the One Belt Road initiative also has a component in Latin America, 19 countries participating in the planning, but also some plans to connect a major infrastructure to connect the different oceans in Latin America and allowing the Chinese government to have more communications and more infrastructure in benefit of Chinese exports. So more investment, more infrastructure, and also the use of the bank system and all the Chinese bank system to invest in infrastructure in different countries, in mining projects, oil development, and different other ventures. So far, it has been a crucial, a fundamental investment in this country, and it has been China banks lend more funds to the region than the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, or the U.S. Export-Import Bank, I had some conversation with some of my friends in those institutions, and some of them depend on the Chinese. They go there, they negotiate with the Chinese, they receive funds from the Chinese to manage the funds from the Chinese. That's the case of the Corporación Andina de Fomento and other institutions that then they lend the money. So these numbers also need to take into account the second level funding that comes from China. China goes directly to these instruments and they lend the money to the country. So that has been a major change. So that gives Chinese control. What is one of the factors that have been allowing the Chinese regime to be successful is the mistakes from the U.S. short-term approach, allowing the Chinese regime, the CCP, to implement their plan over the long run. It has been a plan that has been implemented successfully. They have been gaining track in Latin America, and the U.S. has been allowing that. And right now, if you can see that, it's the Chinese regime is more popular than the U.S. in some of these countries. We see they have a favorable opinion about China in Argentina, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Mexico, in Peru, in Venezuela. They have they like the Chinese investment there. They agree that the Chinese investment need to be part of the economy. And in the other side of the question, we see how the U.S. has been losing ground in Latin America. And this is a new one. The other one is from 2017. In 2019, the Pew Research only included Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil. But what we can see here, and instead of reducing the impact of China or the potential interest of people to getting into negotiation with China and the favorable opinion with China, it has been growing. It has been growing in all these countries. The major countries in the region has a favorable opinion about China. I want to take advantage of this presentation also to take some time to talk about crucial issues with respect with China's engagement in Latin America. Yes, we saw about the economy, how the economy operates. That is the cheerleader kind of approach. But we know that the Chinese investment has some high toll in terms of the environment, human rights, fundamental freedoms. First, it's about a violation of labor rights, a restriction of freedom of expression, environmental destruction, a lack of transparency. Nobody knows what the Chinese agreement, and how the Chinese agreement will impact all these countries in the future. It's authorities with no transparency at all. Some of these agreements are agreements that take into account the greedy and the greed and the lack of a rule of law in all these countries, and that creates a problem for all these countries. Also, we have the engagement of the Chinese regime supporting the domestic crackdown in all these authoritarian countries, because they also want for the rest of the country to support the crackdown. They want for other countries not getting involved with what's going on in China. And they have been buying the ethics, the morale, they have been buying the conscience of the countries in Latin America, and they have been refraining from criticizing China. Several human rights groups has been complaining about the CCP and the Chinese interest in the region. The military has been growing too. Even though there is not the priority from China, China has been investing more and more in military in Venezuela and other countries in the region. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And also, the China influence in the region has been negative in terms of the markets of the region. So you have the impact in terms of the commodities, the extractive have more impact into the environment, and lack of environmental controls by the governments because they allow the Chinese exploitation because it's good for their own pockets, for the corrupt some of the elites in those countries. The investment in those countries has been growing, but also that is not true. There are more jobs. There are the same amount of jobs if you bring investment from anywhere else, and probably less jobs. I remember talking with one of the authorities in Costa Rica when they decided to dump Taiwan and get into an agreement with China, and the rationale behind, and the Chinese gave them the new soccer stadium. And they were thinking that they will use the local labor for the same. The Chinese burn all their labor to build the things that are priority for them. So that is not true that the Chinese investment bring more in terms of jobs for Latin America. And also Latin American operation in export China has been bringing more and more pollution in Latin America. China has been also expanding in terms of the cultural, media, and academic influence. They know what they're doing. They're trying to change the culture. They're trying to take advantage of the bucolic approach from some of the members of the academia in Latin America and their dreams about the hegemonic defeat to the U.S. Whatever is the reason, they have been successful in terms of penetrating the academia. They have been opening a Confucius Institute in several countries in Latin America, inviting politicians, inviting journalists, bringing those journalists. In 2016, they have been opening a major program to bring journalists to China to help them to understand how China operates, and also help them in terms of the relationship with the Chinese government, and make them believe that they have a connection with the Chinese regime. That has been growing exponentially. And also, China has been expanding, and probably somebody else talk about this, but China has been expanding, penetrating global organizations. And why I include this into the Latin American perspective? Because China has been buying the votes from Latin American countries at the UN because of depth and exchange, solidarity, and that creates an opportunity for China to put some pressure in terms of the votes. So China has been building this connection with all the countries and has been using that effectively at the UN level. The other thing with the relationship, with respect to China relationship with Latin America, is another objective has been getting rid of Taiwan in Latin America. One of the regions in which Taiwan had major support was Latin America. A majority of the countries in Latin America supported Taiwan and believe in the democracy in Taiwan. And China has been moving systematically in each one of these countries, offering trade, offering opportunities, offering different benefits in terms of trade with China. And China has been asking to some of these countries to just end the relationship with Taiwan, to break their relationship with Taiwan. We saw that in Panama, saw that in Costa Rica, in El Salvador. China has been increasing the investment in Nicaragua. Probably something that we're going to see in the future is Nicaragua just dealing with China and not with Taiwan. There's still a major engagement from Taiwan with Honduras, Guatemala, and Belize, but China has been taking also in the Caribbean and trying to get rid of Taiwan in Latin America. With one of the things that I mentioned was this: the weapons, the arms, how this has been evolving under the radar, and how China from zero export to Latin America 10 years ago to being 6% of the weapon market from China. Of all the exports, weapon export from China, 6% in 2016. Probably we're talking of a major number right now. So it's sales of weapons. Some of those weapons goes to Venezuela, but also Argentina, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Peru. They have been also selling technology and different ways also to support also different technologies to support the security, the repression forces in Venezuela or Nicaragua. China has been growing, and this is a potential market for China. One key country that we need to talk about is Venezuela. Venezuela is not the traditional Chinese engagement with Latin America. It's not the traditional case. In Venezuela, China saw an opportunity to also influence the country in terms of controlling part of the economy, controlling the oil industry, controlling the telecommunication, and China invested $67 billion since 2007 in Venezuela. They're providing direct loans for the military. But the difference with Venezuela is the political support to the regime. For the Chinese regime, the political support to Maduro, it's an opportunity to maintain control also of certain decisions in the country and also protect the $67 billion investment. And of course, the payback sometimes is allowing Maduro to be part of the United Nations Human Rights Council and doing some propaganda and also getting involved in more COVID-19 activities with Venezuela. But the fact is also China, the CCP has been a major provider of weapons for Venezuela, for the military, but also for the National Guard, and how also tear gas and the weapons that the police and the National Guard used to repress and used to persecute the population. Chinese regime has been a key actor providing those weapons, providing technology, providing other kind of support that allows also to oversee the opposition and also to create a repressive environment in those countries. China has been really effective in terms of penetrating the military in some of these countries, beginning this trade. Yes, it is a logical approach with Venezuela, with the connection with China, but also China has been signing agreements with other countries, including Argentina. So that creates, for me, yes, that's a red light in the region in terms of China. Then COVID-19, China, instead of being the enemy, China is the country that has been supporting the region. China created the problem, but China now has been supporting the region, creating an opportunity for the China investment in these countries, opportunities in terms of political engagement, opportunities in terms of more and more popular support in all of these countries. So China is taking advantage of the coronavirus crisis to increase the penetration in all this country. So I'm gonna stop now to open the room for Q&A and to expand some of the opinions here, or if you have any doubts about any of the operations from China into Latin America, or specifically into key countries in Latin America.
Thank you, Carlos, for an absolutely illuminating presentation of the multifaceted character of Chinese engagement in Latin America. Before we proceed, I want to remind those in attendance that you can submit your questions for Carlos via the Q&A function, which should be located at the bottom of your screen. Now let's turn to some of the questions attendees have already sent in. So to begin, I think we can just cut straight to the matter. Why are these countries taking Chinese investments? What benefits are they actually receiving, especially if they're just, there are no jobs attached to it? And how will these Chinese loans, affect the democratic character of these democratic states? And finally, as I think this is related, have the elites of Latin America been captured by the CCP? And if so, what can we do about it?
Yeah, there are several questions in one. Why? Because it's an economic opportunity. The elite has been in bed with some of the governments for a long time. So this is an opportunity to get to receive more profit and operate in a new market and take advantage of the rent-seeking also activities in terms of the governments. The Chinese regime has been also paying in advance and helping to corrupt officials to get some benefit from the relationship with China. The Chinese regime also has been allowing some of the countries to have a different approach in terms of the environmental controls, the labor controls. So no one else wants to go to these countries and destroy part of the national park. Only Chinese investors are ready to do that because of the Chinese government, because they know they're going to be protected by the government. This is basically why it's so easy for them to operate. All the lack of rule of law, lack of effective judiciary, rule of law, corrupt regimes, corrupt governments. You have countries like Venezuela, like Cuba, like Nicaragua, with authoritarian or dictatorial regimes, but also you see countries with weak institutions and messianic leaders like Mexico, for example, that they believe that they are better than the rest of the world, and they're gonna have a better relationship with China than the rest of country that has been affected by China. They also, the problem with this is that the destruction that the Chinese CCP creating this country is permanent, because they enter there, they secure their investment. When people think about getting rid of China in any of these countries, they make a major mistake, because the Chinese has been protecting their investment. They make the government to approve all the investment. They have all the concessions. They have everything ready. In case of any change in government, they will be ready to defend China. And we saw that with Bolsonaro in Brazil. Bolsonaro offered the U.S. at the beginning of the Trump administration that the Brazilian government will stop and cut all the commercial relationships with China. And that never happened. Instead of that, China has been putting pressure into Brazil when Brazil blamed China due to the coronavirus, and threat Brazil with cutting the imports from Brazil. And instead of that, when Brazil changed its political or foreign affairs perception about the coronavirus, the Chinese regime opened an opportunity for Brazil, and the Chinese regime has been importing all the cows from Brazil because of the COVID-19. China needs all the cows from Brazil. So it has been an operation for the Brazilian government, and that has been increasing the opportunity for them. So it is using the market, it is using the lack of rule of law, and using the greedy environment in this country. You have greed into the elites, and they don't care about the situation of the country. They don't care about jobs. They never care about jobs.
So picking up on the COVID pandemic, has that helped China in its efforts to gain influence, or has it hindered it? Has it allowed it to accelerate its activities or slowed it down?
China was the only one prepared. That's the reality. The U.S. was not prepared to support the U.S. response has been in terms of budgeting and including the enough resources to support some of the countries in the region. But the U.S. Bureaucracy has a different structure than the Chinese. As soon as we have the budget approved, then you find an implementer. The implementer charge 40–50% of the money to operate. Then the money goes to the country, and you're talking about 4–6 months in all this process. For the Chinese, the decision-making process is just straightforward. A decision of sending a plane to Mexico was a political decision, straightforward. They send the plane, no one else involved in the decision, no one else in charge of auditing whatever happened, and they send the plane directly to Mexico or to Argentina or to Haiti. They send that directly, and they have the capability. So in terms of the capabilities of the regime to operate under a crisis, in terms of selling the propaganda, the Chinese regime has been very, very effective. I had this feeling at the beginning that the whole coronavirus crisis will impact China, but instead of that, China has been taking advantage of the crisis and has been collaborating and selling the good image to several of the countries in the region, and they own China now, the support because of China's engagement, supporting them in the health crisis in each one of the countries.
Thank you. You've mentioned several times commodities, infrastructure, telecommunications. Do you think that all of these investments will eventually translate to the Chinese demanding military bases in Latin America?
I don't see the military bases. They don't need the bases right now. They're only going to need that in case of any country, if any country try to get rid of the Chinese investment or get rid of the Chinese contracts or the concessions. It is the only time that you're going to see more engagement from China. China doesn't need the military except for the business side that is selling weapons to the region. They want to enter in this new market, and they see that's an opportunity for it. And you're going to see that from 6%, this market is going to grow because China wants to compete with Russia in getting into some of the markets, and more in terms of the use of new technologies and the use also of the new ways to control the population. China is very effective on that. I don't think the Chinese regime wants to open military operations in the region, except for one military boat and some minor engagement with some of the military components from Venezuela or from Cuba. Some things that they did in Nicaragua. They don't have that. They don't need that right now. With all the economic muscle, they have been open in the region. They opened the markets. And in terms of telecommunication, they have been growing exponentially. I remember that I had an offer years ago to join One-Way when I worked with the telecom, and it was a minor operation at that time. I say no, it was a minor operation. I saw the numbers, and now Huawei is probably one of the major investors in 5G in some of the countries. It's taking and you're gonna see in 2 or 3 years, Huawei and the Chinese government gonna control the telecommunications in Brazil. They're willing to invest $800 million just to enter to the market, and they're gonna control the telecommunication in Brazil because they want that market.
Thank you. So China, I think it's fair to say, is now a major stakeholder in the Venezuelan economy. And you've said that this is going to make the next government dependent on China. Will this also make a future transition back to a system of political and economic liberty more difficult? That is this reinforcing the authoritarian character of politics within Venezuela? And what is it that the US and other free states can do to support a free Venezuela in the future?
Well, first, I will begin with the US. The short-term planning in the US government has been eliminating the possibilities for long-term results. So that means that thinking about just things that needs to be fixed right away and things without enough strategic analysis has been allowing some of the things from happening, from Chinese engagement in the region, and everybody, several experts has been talking about this for a couple of decades, about the expansion from China and how China has been taking more and more opportunities and increasing the size of the operation. And nobody has been doing anything, because that means that you need a long-term planning and also a coordination with the business sector to increase the size of the U.S. operation in Latin America and improve that. With some countries like Venezuela, yes, any government that will come after, if there is a democratic government or some kind of democratic government after Maduro, will have to deal with China. There's no way that you can avoid the negotiation with the Chinese regime. China wants the return of the 67 plus interest, plus benefits, plus numerous things. And according to what I hear, the government, Maduro government, has been giving the Chinese everything. So nobody knows the extension of the concessions that the Chinese regime already has in Venezuela. So it's mining, it's oil, it's land. I even heard that Maduro gave the regime an island. So you have all of that. So the new government in Venezuela will need to deal with a narco state plus a Chinese engagement and controlling of probably all the basic service. Even the telecommunications sector in Venezuela right now is in the hands of one way, and the Chinese government is controlling the telecommunication, and has been really effective with that. Even there is a plan to create a connection between China and the countries in Latin America, the direct connection, because they plan to use all the infrastructure, the telecommunication infrastructure in the region to better connection and create a strong network in favor of the China's investment and control.
Would you say that the recent collapse in oil prices have strengthened China's hand vis-a-vis Venezuela? That is, has the regime had to provide even greater concessions now that the current value of the oil-related infrastructure and the oil revenue is depressed?
I believe right now China doesn't want to give more money to Venezuela. One of the things that we have to have in mind, that is the problem with China, there is a pragmatic authoritarian regime. It's not the pragmatic authoritarian regime is more dangerous than the passional, traditional strong men from Latin America or the traditional authoritarian regime. They are pragmatical, they are evaluating the investment, they review all the situation in countries. So China doesn't want to give more money to Maduro, because they know that Maduro is an incompetent, that the levels of corruption is something that is beyond any wildest dream. So the Chinese regime doesn't want to give more money to Maduro. What they have is giving opportunities to Maduro to pay back, giving other type of support to Maduro, equipment for the coronavirus. They don't want to give more money to Maduro, even though Maduro has been trying several times to offer more and more. So that's why Maduro has been looking at other potential partners for this, has been dealing right now with Iran, and has been trying with Russia. Russia doesn't want to give more money to Maduro. The situation in Venezuela is a different situation than the rest of the country. That is why China is focusing more its attention to Brazil I believe that the new frontier from China is expanding the business in Brazil, is controlling infrastructure in Brazil, controlling telecommunication in Brazil, controlling business in Brazil. For China, and Brazil is the next frontier. Venezuela is just a matter of maintaining the face, one. Second, that China cannot support anything different from happening in Venezuela than maintaining this regime or an exit that's going to benefit China, and our government that's not going to go against China, because China knows if something happens in Venezuela, that will have repercussion in terms of the international approach to China. China needs to protect the regime in Venezuela. So it's more protection of the regime than investment in Venezuela. I don't think that China will get anything else from Venezuela. There's going to be when the regime fell apart in Venezuela, when the regime collapsed, we're going to see that probably the Chinese government is the owner of 80% of Venezuela. Who knows what is there? Nobody knows what are the agreements. My view is that China is looking other markets. It's looking to expand Argentina's market, expand Brazil, expand Mexican market. Now with López Obrador, there's an opportunity for China to have more activities in Mexico.
Now, aside from the short-sightedness of U.S. policy, what has been the single greatest contributor to the success the CCP has had in gaining influence in Latin America? And what can the American government and American civil society do to counter or address this?
I believe that there was a major failure from the Obama administration, and probably by the end of the Bush administration. This has been a plan that has been in place for at least a decade or 2 decades. It has been an open plan. The CCP has been open about the plans for Latin America. They also has been open and has been sharing that plan in every meeting. So there's no surprise about the plans from China to operate in Latin America. The problem with the lack of planning the other side, and people believe that it was crazy that China will pass from 1% of the market to 20-something, 30% of the Latin American market, and probably 40% of the market, and increasing in some countries like Argentina, taking control of the soy market in Argentina, the meat market of Argentina, and then controlling those countries and be the one who set the prices. That's the other challenge. But apart from that, the Chinese regime took advantage of the Chavez dream to destroy the U.S. With Cuba, they decided to open the door to different groups, terrorist groups, but also China opened the door for China to invest in the region. And that was a part of business, part ideological approaches, part of the opportunities of having an open market there, and nobody cared about that market. And the Chinese regime saw that opportunity and took the opportunity and has been planning for that and applying that plan systematically and taking all the opportunities.
Now, you've mentioned Chinese involvement in penetration of international organizations. Is China involved in the Sao Paulo Forum? And is China financing far-left political parties and organizations in Latin America?
Well, what China was behind was all these groups. They began to operate without the U.S. They tried to create several regional blocs, excluding the U.S. and China was behind that, behind those blocs and participating in those meetings. And I don't believe that China has been involved in more than the Chinese advantage in the region. The Chinese regime doesn't need that. The Chinese regime only needs to use the corrupt elites in those countries, in the corrupt officials, and not getting involved in the nitty-gritty of this movement. The Chinese regime has been very successful, even in Colombia. that is a good partner for the U.S. in a country that the U.S. has been taking the fight against the guerrillas and has been taking a fight to improve the economy in Colombia. So Chinese, even in Colombia, that is a more close, or Mexico before López Obrador. The Chinese regime has been very effective negotiating economic agreements, and with economic agreements having more and more influence in those countries and buying the private sector also, taking control of the airports, taking control of the ports, taking control of some infrastructure, and taking control of the commodities, the minerals. And that is what is going to be important in the future of China.
So which is the bigger threat to freedom in Latin America, the Chinese Communist Party or the Cuban Communist regime? And related to that, how coordinated have China and Cuba been in making common cause against freedom?
Yeah, for Latin America, China is a major threat than Cuba. Cuba has become the Phoenicians of the Caribbean. They take advantage of the opportunity. They're sending unqualified practitioners, that they call them doctors, and they charge premium doctors fees for they work in those countries, and they pay cents to these people, and with which is major human trafficking and exploitation. They're taking advantage of the crisis that led COVID-19 and sending these doctors everywhere, and that represents income for Cuba, taking advantage of the crisis in Venezuela to take away some of the resources from Venezuela, oil and some resources, and maintain an ineffective and a failure state like Cuba, a failure communist country like Cuba that doesn't produce anything and people is poor. That is a poor country that has been maintaining operations because they took advantage of the Cold War, they took advantage of the lack of engagement and the dream about the Che Guevara, whatever thing that people has in mind with Cuba, that makes countries like Canada, France, and other countries give the contribution with that failure, a country that violates human rights. Cuba's particular influence in Venezuela. Cuba had some influence in the rest of the region in the past, but not anymore, since the Sao Paulo Forum ceased to be effective anymore when Lula and they're in jail and all the corruption behind the Sao Paulo. Probably in the future is gonna have some, but Fidel is no longer there. So the architect of the ideology behind the Cuban regime is not there anymore. It's an island that is just surviving, manipulating. But the Chinese regime is more a threat to the region. Imagine what's going to happen in terms of the soy and the price of the soy. The soy from the U.S. goes to China. Almost all the soy from Argentina goes to China. Almost all the soy from Brazil goes to China. China can control the price of the soy directly. If all the meat from Argentina or from Brazil ended in China, China can control the price of meat. So China will have an opportunity to decide about the trade, price, tariff. The Chinese regime can't decide anything unilateral right now. That is a major threat for the region. China can expand the hegemonic control because China is getting more and more into the oil industry. China right now receives 13% of the oil that goes to China comes from Brazil, and like 15% of the oil comes from Venezuela. So you're talking about 20-something% of the oil that goes to China comes from Latin America, two major countries. China only needs Mexico, and with Mexico, China will have the three major oil countries, and Guyana. And China gets Guyana and Mexico. China will have a major control of the oil industry also in the region.
Now, you've mentioned a few times that in many Latin American countries, China is popular. What needs to happen to raise awareness among Latin American citizens about the negative consequences of Chinese economic engagement?
The problem is also this bucolic ideology behind some of the social movements in Latin America. They began a process against China a couple of years ago because of China's human rights violations, labor violations, human rights, and they created a document. They began to put pressure, and only took the Chinese government compromise in a meeting that they will respect some of this and support some of the indigenous movement for this movement to fall apart, because they are so anti, I have to be honest with us, so anti-US in some of these movements. They want to see China as a champion for the region in a nonsense fairy tale that the US is involved in whatever kind of craziness in the region. You have to blame the U.S. for all the failures of the region, of all the crooks in the business sector and all the corrupt in the governments, and the failures from having a useless military. So that is not the U.S. to blame. So they prefer to go with the Chinese, and they prefer to fall in love with the Chinese. So that is a problem. That is a problem. Is that we need to expose the regime, expose the Chinese engagement, and the U.S. need to be more active in terms of promoting investment in the region. And the U.S. Business sector need to open the eyes in the terms of the opportunity instead of exploring markets in other places. Try to see if there are opportunities in Latin America to build better partnerships.
Do we need a Marshall Plan for Latin America? Would that allow us to counter the CCP?
The problem with the Marshall Plan and the investment, the U.S. investment, is that we, in my view, and I have to be honest, it's something that I'm having concern for years. It's something that I have been researching, and I hope they're going to publish soon about that, is the rent-seeking society that is behind the foreign aid in the U.S. That as soon as we create a Marshall Plan for the region, that's what we try with Central America, to prevent immigration from Central America. The U.S. set aside $1 billion to support infrastructure, to support security, to support improvement in the governments in the Central America and in the Triangle. And what happened is that the same implementers that Washington or the Bellwood bandits, like some people call it, took advantage of that and took a major advantage of the money, and probably at the end we implemented 10-20%, and then the U.S. decided to stop the projects and send the money to Venezuela. That's a different story. But the problem, if we don't change, we need to change also the system. We need to change how Washington operates. We need to change how we do business outside. We need for a better private-public partnership to operate in this country, but not with contractors, not with people who take advantage of our taxpayer money. If we're gonna do the same that we have been doing for the last 50 years, it's gonna be the same. So that's why we fail. Changing that is a priority before thinking about putting money into the region.
Well, thank you. As one last question, looking ahead 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I mean, you've been engaged for almost 30 at this point in this region and the cause of liberty in the region. Is Latin America on the right track or the wrong track? And if it's on the right track, how can we keep it there? And if it's on the wrong track, how can we switch that track?
Now the cycle is in the more center-right government, we can say that. But that doesn't mean they are not authoritarian. That doesn't mean they are more democratic. And that doesn't mean there are opportunities for the traditional caudillos, the traditional strong men to return to power. We saw that happen in Mexico, that López Obrador, that's a populist guy, won the election because people are so tired of the corruption and that they elected this populist. We saw the same thing in Argentina, how the corrupt and authoritarian Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, she's now the vice president. So it is a never-ending cycle. Unless we defeat the corruption, unless we create institutions, unless we improve governance in the region, we're going to have the same situation over and over. Some improvement, the countries begin to move forward, and then something happens. And none of the countries in the region is safe. We saw that with Chile. Everybody had the impression 2 years ago that Chile was the paradise in the region, and nothing could happen in Chile. And it happened. A major disruption, and it will take some time for Chile to recover. So the region needs to change in terms of the structures, the culture, and the mindset of the Latin Americans. That is the hard part. And I'm not optimistic right now. I hope there's going to be change, and I hope that technology will help. I hope that this the social media revolution will also take a toll into the corrupt governments and the corrupt activities from some of the members of this government, and we will help to expose them. But let's see, it's too soon to tell.
Well, thank you, Carlos, not only for joining us, but also for your decades-long and ongoing work on behalf of the cause of freedom in the Western Hemisphere. And thank you all for attending. If you would like to follow Carlos's work, you can find him on Twitter at CE Ponce with an S. Please join us for our next event in the Understanding China series, which will take place on Thursday, May 7th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The subject will be Free Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Time, during which we will hear from Jillian K. Melchior, an editorial page writer at the Wall Street Journal, where she covers politics, activism, and higher education, among other subjects. You can find more information about the event and the work of the VOC China Studies team at victimsofcommunism.org. For the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, I'm Murray Bissett. Thank you all again. Have a great day and remain healthy.